a majority of young people, about 52%, don't believe that our democracy is responsive to them and that our political system is failing. And so we have too many politicians who are not transparent, are not accessible, don't mean what they say, don't deliver results, and are just basically fake. And so it's not surprising why so many voters feel disillusioned today. Hi, I'm Steven Olikara. I'm running for the U.S. Senate here in the state of Wisconsin. I think anyone who's running for office has a responsibility to not only say what they truly believe, but also have a plan of action. And often we get one or the other, but not both. And so both are required to rebuild faith in our democracy right now. I come to this U.S. Senate race with the experience of the last decade of building legislative change through Congress as well as in state legislatures. And so every idea that I'm proposing, I'm also thinking, what is the plan of action and what is the plan for implementation? That's the difference between whether Wisconsinites feel an impact or whether they don't, and whether real change happens or whether it doesn't. And so that's why I feel so passionately about really explaining the kinds of issues that we're talking about. Another part of our agenda is called Dignity for All. Dignity for all, to me, means dignity in terms of our political discourse. We need a more dignified way of relating to each other right now. And politics often becomes so toxic and so divisive. But I think if we create spaces that uphold dignity, respect, and inclusion, then we're going to have the ability to not only have real conversations, but also create real change. And that's been my background for the last 10 years, is organizing communities around a dignified political conversation. This is why I say within our lifetimes, this is the biggest inflection point in our democracy. Well, this is the biggest inflection point for our democracy within our lifetimes because we have now situations like January 6th and the Capitol insurrection, where people are actively challenging the peaceful transfer of power. Now, this, I think, was predictable years ago, actually, when you look at the deeper trends in our democracy, the trends around distrust, the trends around polarization, the trends around voting. So that's why we're at this inflection point, and we have to choose a new kind of politics if we want to be able to pass on this incredible experiment in diverse democracy to the next generation. That's what gets me fired up and why I'm in this race. It's unsustainable when, for example, you have congressional approval ratings that are hovering around 20%, and yet over 85% of congressional members get reelected. Or when you see that over 75% of Americans don't believe that politics are going to solve the problems that we face, and the trust in the federal government is even lower. So there's a fundamental systemic breakdown that's happening right now, and it's bigger than any individual politician. We need to engage on this issue in a smart and sophisticated way, and we want to be able to channel the real anger and distrust that's out there towards significant systemic structural reform that will make our democracy more responsive to ordinary people in our country. And that's why I started the Millennial Action Project. Millennial Action Project is all about creating real legislative change. And that's been what I've focused on over the last decade. The core idea was, when we have this rising polarization, can we train the next generation of leaders to be coalition builders, bridge builders, and change agents in the legislative process? We focused on Congress as well as in state legislatures. And we did three things with our legislators. We convened them and built relationships. We developed new policy ideas that were not about boiling it down to the least common denominator. It was about finding new ideas and new solutions. And then the third thing was promoting that this new way of governance is possible. And so it's become a movement. We've trained over 2,000 young elected leaders across the country. Today, Millennial Action Project is the largest nonpartisan organization of young elected leaders in the country. We need to change the business model of our politics. The business model of our politics today is inherently flawed. There is a multi-billion-dollar industry focused on hate and dehumanization and polarization. And what that looks like in practice is politicians and a lot of their affiliated organizations profiting on your fear and your anger because they know that's going to get you to donate. And frankly, a lot of politicians have succeeded with that kind of tactic. But I don't think it's the right thing to do. It doesn't set members of Congress up to make real change. And on top of that, it's making us all hate each other. And so this is part of the reason why there's so much distrust in the political system today. And if we don't address this root issue, we're not going to be able to solve problems, and we might totally lose faith in our democracy. There are a lot of things that happen in Washington that people there think are normal, but most ordinary people would say that is totally corrupt, or that is wrong, or that is unresponsive to our needs. So I talk a lot about money in politics because it's not just about how money from a lot of these corporate lobbyists influence legislation. Sometimes I've seen that these corporate lobbyists will insert these one-line carve-outs in a 4,000-page bill that the public will never see. It's that kind of corruption, but also it's the corruption of how time is allocated. I'll never forget, I talk about this sometimes on the campaign trail, about a member of Congress leaving at 1 o'clock in the afternoon to cross the street and dial for dollars from their big money special interests. Why is it that the majority of U.S. senators, for example, the vast majority, are millionaires? And the reason for that is because how this millionaire and billionaire influence affects how people get elected in the first place. Because of this system, a lot of working class people often can't even run for office. They can't handle the challenge financially or have the network of rich people, frankly, to be able to run for office in the first place. I think if we want to represent working class issues, we should have an electoral system where working class people can be the agenda setters. So that is at the root of this money in politics issue. It's the corruption. It's how members of Congress aren't set up to do their jobs, and how working class people can't be the agenda setters. We want to change the system through our reforms to get money out of politics.